everyone, welcome back to Fresh Parchment. I'm Heather, and today I'd like to talk you through all the books that I bought in August. I said I wasn't going to buy any more books after July, that there might be a couple and no more. Well, that didn't exactly happen. When does it ever? If you are good at sticking to a book buying ban, please teach me your ways. But I do have a couple of books here to show you nonetheless, which is quite exciting. I first picked up a few books directly from the UK, the first of which is A Sky Painted Gold by Laura Wood. And first of all, this cover is stunning, so of course I'm intrigued about what's inside. This is about a young girl in Cornwall in 1929 who somehow befriends this incredibly rich family and is slowly drawn into their circle. And it seems quite lovely when she begins, but slowly she realizes that maybe wealth isn't everything, and maybe there's more wrong with this family than she originally thought. I've heard mixed things, but I love Cornwall. I've loved the Poldark books. I'm very much looking forward to returning to Cornwall in this book as well, a little later on. Then I picked up a novel which I have now already read, and that is Mr. Malcolm's List by Suzanne Allain? I'm not sure. But it is about Mr. Malcolm, who is one of the most eligible bachelors in Regency society, but he is very picky about who he attempts to court, and his courtships never last long. And one day, Julia Thistlethwaite is escorted by him to the opera, and then never hears from him again. And she is outraged. What could possibly be wrong with her? Luckily, she is cousins with Mr. Malcolm's friend Cassie. And Cassie lets slip that Mr. Malcolm has a list of requirements for his future bride. And if someone that he courts does not meet one of those requirements, well then, he drops that courtship. And Julia is outraged and bent on revenge. So she calls up her friend Selina and begs her to come pay a visit, and Selina will form the main character in Julia's revenge plot. But of course, it's a Regency romance, so things go terribly wrong. I was so intrigued by this book, especially after seeing a short intro film for it, which is called Mr. Malcolm's List Overture. It is absolutely stunning. It's available on YouTube. I'll link it down below. And was part of a project by the site Refinery29 to get more films produced and written by female writers on the screen. So that means that this will one day become a film. It was supposed to have been shooting this summer, but that's been delayed because of the pandemic. I cannot wait for that film to come out. And the book was okay, but this might be a rare case where the film may be even better. Still worth a read though. The next book that I picked up came highly recommended by Marissa from Blatantly Bookish and Katie of Books and Things, and I'll link their channels down below as well. And it is Bellman and Black by Diane Setterfield. This had been on my radar for many, many years, but it kind of fell to the back of my want to read list. And then I saw their reviews of it quite recently, and it piqued my interest once again. As far as I can tell, it's good to go into this book not knowing very much about the plot. I do know that it is about William Bellman, who one day shoots a rook with his catapult, and this then sets off a series of tragic events. He is somehow cursed forever after that. And a series of magically real or possibly fantastical things happen to him after that. It's giving me very much Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell vibes, which I loved. So I'm so excited that there will be something else potentially in my life to give me those same wonderful feelings. The next 4 books I picked up from Half Price Books website. I have heard about Half Price Books from many, many booktubers, but they do not exist here on the east coast of the US. But I discovered they have a website. So I ordered 4 books to see what condition the books would arrive in, to see if this was a worthwhile site to use in the future. They all arrived in mostly lovely condition. There's one exception, but I'll come to that. And the first of those 4 books is Slammerkin by Emma Donoghue, which is an ex-library edition based on the binding, but I don't mind because it is an ex-library edition in beautiful condition. It doesn't look like anyone ever used this. This, as far as I can tell, is about a young woman in 18th century England with a passion for the finer things in life, such as ribbons and lace and beautiful clothing, but she can't afford it. And so somehow her desires always lead her back into prostitution, no matter what else happens to her along the way. Again, that's almost all I know. I love the 18th century, especially the seedier side of the 18th century. I find that particularly fascinating, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's mainly because it proves that the 18th century wasn't nearly as prim and proper as most people tend to think of it. And Emma Donoghue is a brilliant writer. I have several of her books on my TBR, but I haven't actually read any of them. And 2 of them fall into this 18th century vein. So I will either get to this one or Life Mask very, very soon and let you know what I think. Next, I ordered Last Tang Standing by Lauren Ho. I was craving something like Crazy Rich Asians, but I finished that series, and this was infinitely cheaper than buying Kevin Kwan's new book, which isn't even available for another couple of weeks, I don't think. But anyway, this was more readily accessible, and it sounds like a lot of fun. It's all about Andrea Tang, who has a successful career, is financially stable, has everything she could want. And then this man wanders into her life who would be exactly the man that her family would want her to marry. Also very successful, of Asian roots, very financially well off. But she's not entirely sure that she needs a man to complete her, especially one of whom her family would approve. And then apparently her business partner mixes in as well as a potential love interest. It just sounds like a lot of fun, very fluffy, but also really interesting. Next, because this book seems to have been everywhere these days, I picked up The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I did read Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro a few years ago, and I really enjoyed it. And I never really wanted to approach this one, I think because I kept getting it and Howard's End muddled in my head. And those 2 plots combined sounded really boring. But now it's been appearing everywhere on BookTube, so I've taken that as a sign that perhaps I'm meant to read this book. And now that I have read Howard's End at the beginning of this year, I am not confusing it at all with the plot of The Remains of the Day. This is about a butler at it's after World War II. Not quite into the 50s yet, I don't think, but it's at the end of an era. It's the end of the era of butlers and the landed gentry and working in a big house and everything that this man has built his life on. And so he decides he is going to write the history of his great house and his great master. And in doing so, you get both the understanding of how the society worked and why he would feel so proud to be a part of it and so sad to lose it. But at the same time, as he's writing it, he begins to unravel some secrets. And perhaps his life and his way of life was not as great as he has led himself to think. I'm very excited to read it, but my one qualm with the way this book showed up is that the person who owned it previously highlighted and underlined and drew on various pages throughout this book. It's not intrusive, but it still kind of bothers me. If I had found this myself at a book sale, I probably would have put it back, just because I don't like reading books with other people's notes in them. I know some people like to annotate their books, and that's fantastic. Please do that to your own books. Also, don't do it to library books. My mother is a librarian, and she has discovered 2 classic books that people have written all over in the margins. Don't do that, guys. Library books are not your own books. But even so, with a donated copy that was once someone else's personal property, I don't necessarily want to know what they felt was important. I want to be able to work that out for myself. Just a little nitpicky thing. Let me know how you feel. And the last book that I ordered from Half Price Books was The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. This is another book that has been floating around on my radar for years, but I was never entirely sure what it was about. But again, I started seeing it recommended on people's booktube channels, and I stumbled on the fact that the BBC had adapted it for television, and I became very, very interested. It centers around a young man who enters the New Zealand gold rush, which I wasn't aware that that was a thing. Let me know, did that actually happen in history, or is this some sort of fantastical alternate history? But in any case, he enters the New Zealand gold rush, and he encounters a group of 12 men sitting and discussing mysterious events, and is gradually drawn into not quite a secret society, not quite an underworld, but into a world that he never really knew existed, that involves all sorts of fantastical lore and is roughly based on astrology, and it sounds absolutely fascinating. Again, it's giving me slight Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell type vibes, so I'm very excited to have 2 fantastical historical books in my life. And the last 2 books that I picked up recently you will have seen in my 24-hour readathon and cozy reading night vlog, but I will briefly go through them again. The first is The Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner, and this is about a group of people, I believe 5 or 6 people, who come together post-World War II to try to save Jane Austen's house, what is now the Chawton House Museum and Library, for a variety of reasons, but they all love Jane Austen. And I'm very excited to read this. I got to see Natalie Jenner speak on a virtual panel recently, and I love that she is exploring other people's love for Jane Austen and how that can unite other people, especially men. I feel like you never hear about men's love for Jane Austen as much as you hear about women's love for Jane Austen, and her works are not gender biased at all. Men can love Jane Austen just as much. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. It sounds really sweet. And the last book that I picked up in my local independent bookstore for Independent Bookstore Day, a belated celebration of that day, is Mary Toft, or The Rabbit Queen by Dexter Palmer, which is based on a true story of a young woman called Mary Toft who reportedly gave birth to rabbits. And so this book follows that story and follows 2 doctors or scientists who are trying to study her to see whether or not this was indeed possible. Because of course they are men of science, men of logic, this could not possibly have happened, but I have the feeling that those beliefs get very challenged when they actually start studying and working with Mary. Once again, it's 18th century, true story, but slightly fantastical. How many times can I say fantastical in a book haul? And hints of witchcraft, all things that I absolutely love and adore. So I'm hoping I do, in fact, love and adore this book. So those were all of the books that I bought in the month of August. I am going to try to be better, she says again, about buying books over the next 2 months, so I may or may not have a book haul going forward, because then we approach both my birthday and Christmas. So I try to back off on the book buying whenever possible as I approach those months, so that I don't accidentally buy something that someone is also giving me as a gift. So let me know, have you read any of these? Are you also excited about any of these now that I've described them? What books have you picked up that you're really excited to read? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love talking to you all. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.